and welcome to the Stiles Council, and this is a little bit of a break from the normal format. Basically, I'm going to be popping up on your podcast feed every now and then, talking to some of the great and good from football culture about their favourite England game, and going into some of the reasons why, going into some of the specifics of the game, and hopefully jogging your memory along the way. Now, I'm starting with somebody who is a friend of mine, but we're also starting with a massive game too. Joining me this evening is Seb Patrick. Seb, how are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks. Maybe slightly less so after remembering this game, but yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of nice things around this game too. But Seb, just to introduce yourself a little bit, regular When Saturday Comes contributor, a great sort of litany of great articles on there. Your piece around the time of Suarez's troubles at Liverpool, for me, is one of the best pieces that has ever been on When Saturday Comes, actually.
Yeah, thank you. Even though I did kind of say, because that was before the season, and I think I was of the view that he wasn't worth the trouble. I think I came out arguing that after the Evra incident, he was more trouble than he was worth, and I didn't want him to be associated with Liverpool, and that they should probably cash in that summer, and that was in the summer of 2013. So
yeah. Yeah, but also voice from, I mean, me and Seb are friends because we are the two people at the centre of the football and comics Venn diagram.
Yeah, and I'm probably both a bit miffed that neither of us is doing the Roy the Rovers reboot. It's like, who else is in that Venn diagram?
Yeah. I mean, it's not even like we literally discussed it happening before it was a thing.
Yeah.
But also voice from Cinematic Universe, your various websites you can go to read your work, everything from Formula One liveries to Red Dwarf to... What would you most like to pimp right off the bat?
Well, as you mentioned, Cinematic Universe, which is our podcast about comic book movies, which you've guested on a couple of bonus episodes of, helping me talk about 90s DC comics, which is always fun. But we predominantly focus on, kind of looking at all the various different superhero movies of different properties, looking at how they relate to the comics, kind of trying to educate people a little bit on the source material and stuff. And we've got, I was going to say we've got, I don't know when you're releasing this, but we'll be doing our Infinity War episode soon, because we're just on the verge of Infinity War coming out, so that's going to be a fun one, I would imagine. Yeah. And I've also just launched a new podcast, which is a bit crazy of me because I have a 3-year-old child, so I really don't have enough time for podcasts for as many as I do. But if you like the US Office, I have a podcast about it, going through it episode by episode, called Mifflinfinity. And I'm part way through the second season of the show at the moment, just looking at every episode and playing in clips of funny bits of it. So,
and it's very good. I am a listener. Right, to the game. I said we were starting with a big one, and that's exactly what it is. 26th of June 1996, a balmy summer's evening, Germany versus England, 76,000 people at Wembley. Bit of context right off the bat. Where were you? Where did you watch this game?
I watched this game at home. Home on my own. I think my mum was out, but the interesting family context for me is that my dad was away working down south. He often had to do trips kind of down to London and various other places around there. He worked for a company whose offices were literally just across the road from Wembley Stadium at the time. And he was away on work as far as I knew, and indeed that was the case. But I got a phone call from him at half time during this game, and he said, "Guess where I am?" And I said, "Are you in Wembley?" And he said, "Yes." Because somebody had a spare ticket, but the proviso of the ticket was, can you get to Wembley? And while he wasn't at the Wembley office, he was able to go and park at the Wembley office, which was a crucial factor because it was basically impossible to get there and park on the night of that match. But he was able to park at his work and go across the road to Wembley Stadium and watch that match. So he's probably got far more interesting stories about it than I have, to be honest, given that he was actually there. But yeah, I was, let's see, it was summer of 96, so I was 13 going on 14 that year. So, I'd been into football for a few years, but I think Euro 96 was really certainly the first major England tournament that I was properly into. because of, I remember watching and enjoying USA '94, but obviously it was all rooting for Ireland there. And I'd enjoyed Euro 96 greatly. I had missed the Holland game, which is the other fun story I have for Euro 96, because I was in trouble for something. I can't even remember what. But I was not allowed to watch that game. And again, my dad the next morning when I came down and asked what the result was, because obviously, we didn't have the internet in those days and I didn't have a TV in my room. And he was a little bit sheepish when he told me that the score was 4-1. So, I mean, if I'd seen that game, I think, bearing in mind when it happened and the age that I was, that would have been my favourite ever England game. But as it is, this glorious failure, and it is a glorious failure. That's my favourite instead.
That's the weird thing about what hooks you in as an England fan, because it is nearly almost glorious failure. I was actually away for this game. I loved this summer, and I was at a family holiday in Salou in Spain, and I watched this from at the back of a bar full of Germans. And I was quite vocal at the time in my feelings towards the England football team on that night, and thankfully it was quite a good crowd. Actually, there was no, we were. I don't want to use the banter word, but there really isn't another word for it. But
I know you wish there was a word for banter in the good way that didn't have all the connotations that come with it.
1996, I would argue this is before banter went bad. So
yeah, banter was still all right.
And it was great. But going into the game itself, so teams get announced, and I'm going to run through the German team first. And stupidly, this at the time was a team that didn't frighten me at all, because I just didn't know. But
I don't think that's stupidly. That's something I'd argue about this game. Is that, you can go through it, but I had some excellent players, but it's not an all-time great Germany side.
No, it's not at all. It's a really, I'll go through it now, but it's a very functional German side overall else, really. But Köpke in goal, Ziege, Babel, Helmer and Reuter across the back, with Sammer playing nominally as a sweeper, but he spent most of his time as a central midfielder, to be perfectly honest. Then you had Freund and Eltz sat in front of the back four, Scholl, Müller, who we will talk about, and Kuntz up front for Germany. Yeah, it really isn't a... I can remember thinking at the time, that night, my first World Cup that I can sort of remember watching and really enjoying was 1986, where the Germans got all the way to the final, and they were a brilliant side with these really huge names. Then comes 1990, and obviously that German side really did have some frightening players in it. This side, I had no fear, because this England team that I'm going to run through now is bloody brilliant. It really is. We would kill.
I think it's one of the best 11s you'll see at a major tournament.
Yeah, England. We would kill to have this three in midfield and this two up front. But we'll run through it. David Seaman in goal, and Seaman was in a good vein of form at this time. Three across the back: Southgate, Adams, and Pearce. Pearce playing in the middle, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the German goal. Then wing-backs either side, McManaman and Anderton.
McManaman and Anderton as wing-backs.
I know. But you see, this is what I loved about this game, because we did at least try and go for them. But Platt, Ince and Gascoigne in midfield. And, Paul Ince is a fabulous player. When you're thinking Paul Ince is possibly the weakest, then you know you've got a very strong midfield there. And up front, of course, Shearer and Sheringham, who were just sensational, just brilliant. That team, as we've just been alluding to, it really is quite a special time in England's history, because we had a wonderful squad to choose from. And that team, I'm happy to sort of say, was definitely the equal of anybody else in this tournament, wasn't it, Seb?
Yeah, people say Euro 96 was not a classic tournament because there wasn't one truly outstanding, memorable team. I think that's true to an extent, but I think that's largely said by people who don't want to say that team was England, because it was. And that's not, I am not a kind of fervent patriot in that sense. I'm in the sense of, I get very worked up about England games and very emotional and upset during them, yes. But also, I don't usually think England are anything like the best team in a tournament. I don't have unrealistic expectations for them. But yeah, you look at that side and there's just not really a weak link. I mean, it's later era David Platt, but that's actually, in that side, the kind of the age and experience of Platt and Pearce is what's needed really to counterbalance, well, and Gaza to an extent as well, but to counterbalance the younger names in it. That back three, I mean, even with a kind of a relatively inexperienced Southgate, that is a back three to set your watch to,
Yeah. I was looking at this side and I was thinking to myself, out of, say, take the last, 4 or 5 squads we've put together for friendlies or competitive games, I don't think there's anybody in the current squad you would genuinely swap for anyone in there. Possibly the fullbacks.
Well, I mean, if you want fullbacks, and even if you want kind of Guardiola style wing backs, but this is Darren Anderton and Steve McManaman style wing backs. They're not really wing backs, are they?
No,
because you've got an incredibly solid back three and a pretty bloody solid midfield. So most of the best moments in the match come from those two rampaging to the corner of the penalty area.
That's precisely it, and I just wouldn't swap anyone. I wouldn't. I think I look back at, say, the Italia 90 side, and I can make a case for well over half that side, but there are positions you would change. Whereas this one, you look at it and you think, well, no, this is a proper team. But so television coverage kicks off, and can you remember the television coverage, the very start of it? Because I want to talk a little bit about what the BBC did.
Remember in the sense of I've watched it on YouTube in the years since.
Well, I think when people, I mean, it is not a controversial thing to say that Barry Davies was an excellent commentator.
Yes.
But what he does here that I think is absolutely brilliant is he realises something immediately. Des Lynam comes in and, I've heard there's a game, have you heard there's a game and all that sort of thing. Immediately throws to basically pictures of the crowd because they're about to get into Three Lions. Barry Davies basically says a sort of opening line, so I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's something like England want their summer to continue. Three Lions starts, and literally, probably 5 seconds in, Barry Davies, you can hear him say, and he immediately stops himself because he realises this is going to be something special. And he just shuts up and he lets the BBC coverage just be the crowd singing Three Lions from the first note to the very last note. And with about a minute to go, you can actually hear him having a conversation, a very whispered conversation with somebody, which I think he's telling them to shove all the team graphics and everything forward because he's just going to let this run. And the brilliance of Barry Davies is that he realises that the very best thing he can do immediately is shut up. Is just, just be quiet. And then he says a line very, very quickly. And then can you remember the crowd immediately goes into You'll Never Walk Alone?
No, I didn't remember that, actually.
Straight afterwards, the tannoy cracks up. The Wembley tannoy was struggling tonight. There's a load of feedback. But it goes into You'll Never Walk Alone. And Barry Davies, he says something really, really briefly. And again, silence. And it's it goes on, so the two songs together are probably about 6 minutes. But it is genuinely one of the most sort of evocative, goosebumpy 6 minutes you're ever likely to see. And if you go onto YouTube and just put in Germany versus England build-up, you'll be able to see it. And it's just brilliant. It's just absolutely wonderful.
the atmosphere and the feel of it, and the coverage and the commentary and the graphics, all of this is stuff that comes together and is part of the reason why I would call this my favourite England game, even though it is another one that ends in heartbreak, because it's just one of those things where, like, almost everything aesthetically that I want to see about football comes together on this. As I say, I again, probably because of the age I am, it's like those graphics, those tournament graphics and the BBC graphics are the ones that are in my head, kind of, from my kind of childhood and teen years. There's something that I think is maybe even not something that many people would necessarily pick up on, but the fact that it is a game that starts in the sunshine and ends at night, which you get at major tournaments, but you're not really used to seeing at Wembley. So England kind of starting out in the sunshine and getting that early goal, and then later on, it's floodlit and they're losing on penalties. And obviously, the atmosphere and Three Lions and everything, and you can talk about Three Lions being so ridiculously over saturated in the time following, but I was somebody who I remember when they first played out Three Lions on the episode of Fantasy Football League where they premiered it, and no one had heard it before, and they played the video, and I thought it was the greatest thing, and I still think it's the greatest thing.
Yeah, the thing about Three Lions is that it just works. Everything about it just works. The lyrics are catchy enough for any football ground around the world to immediately latch onto, as we saw, because it became an anthem for about half the sides who are at Euro 96. Germany adopted it as an anthem for years after as well. And
they say Germans don't have a sense of humour, but
but it was just brilliant. And that BBC opening, this was it was simultaneously cast on ITV and BBC, and I don't nobody was watching ITV. As brilliant as Brian Moore and Keegan were, and I'll talk about that a little later, nobody was watching it on ITV. That's the reality.
We remember the Barry Davies moments, and I am such a fan of Barry Davies. Like, there are some moments of commentary among my favourites that are favourites ever that are John Motson moments. Gary Lineker scoring against Germany in 1990 comes to mind, but most of my favourite moments are Barry Davies moments. And there's something about Barry Davies in this game in particular that struck me watching it back again, which is Barry Davies's unashamed love of Paul Gascoigne. And you can see that it's a love that goes back to when he scored that free kick against Arsenal, which is my favourite commentary moment ever. Barry Davies' commentary on that is just wonderful. And ever since then, you can follow through, like, Barry Davies having this kind of almost paternal, or I was talking about it to people on Twitter and somebody said it's almost like a kind of a proud head teacher sort of attitude to Gaza, that Gaza is the rough kid done good from Barry Davies's school, and it's throughout this game. There are little moments. There's a moment where he uses the word impudence, but in an affectionate way, and it's like every time Gascoigne does something, Davies is all over it, but it's not in a kind of, it's not a fawning or a sycophantic way. It's just nice. It's like these two people come from different worlds. Barry Davies has been covering football for so long, and yet here is this player who's, had his difficulties and is, a bit of a, enfant terrible of English football, but Barry Davies just finds joy in everything he does. And so that moment, and, that moment, capital T, capital M, his anguish when the ball goes past Gascoigne at that moment, that it could have been Gascoigne to win it. You really feel that, and you just feel that investment, and you don't always get that from commentators, and again, it's not in a kind of ridiculous flag waving, come on England kind of way. It's just, he just has this emotional investment, which I think Davies is sometimes accused of not having, especially compared to Motson.
The thing about that is, people who say that, I just don't think, I don't think they've watched enough Barry Davies covering any England game, because he could be ridiculously brutal about England, because you always got the impression that every time they lost, they let him down personally, and he was invested.
Thing again.
And he was invested, and as somebody who is incredibly prone to sit there watching mid-80s and 90s England friendly highlights on YouTube, he can be ridiculously brutal, to the level of, if that was today, it's the equivalent of a Gary Neville Twitter storm, basically. And people forget how invested he was in watching England, and that comes through. But I always go back to just that start of there's no other commentator in the world who wouldn't have either let it go to the first chorus and then said something, or talked all the way up to about the middle and then realised, right, I need to leave it. And as I said, you can hear him say, and so he's clearly got a train of thought. He's clearly going to go into something, and he just stops himself immediately. And I just think that's the genius of the man, really. So, game kicks off. Dream start for England. Talk me through the goal.
It's one of those where it's almost like it's over. It's kind of over in a flash, isn't it? It's sort of. I can't remember how does it lead to the corner?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's the Ince shot, of course. Ince has this speculative shot that Kupka kind of punches over the bar, and you kind of sense he didn't really need to. It's a bit of an over dramatic punch over the bar, I think. Because it's a decently hit shot from Ince, but it's it's not one where it leaves his boot and you think, oh, he's scored here. And it's the corner is just one of those where you get a feeling sometimes with set pieces, and usually you get them against you, where you're like, oh well, they're definitely going to score from this. You know, I spent the second leg of Man City Liverpool feeling that about every single free kick and corner that Man City had, especially because I was watching Liverpool and conceding from set pieces. That's what Liverpool sides do. But there is just that, it's 2-3 minutes in, it's a Gascoigne corner. Alan Shearer is in the penalty area. There's only one place that it's going, really. Yeah,
it's a real. It's such a typically English goal. It's near post corner, flick on from a big defender. It's Tony Adams, isn't it, who gets the flick on?
Yeah.
And Shearer makes a late sort of darting 6-yard run and just nods it into past a goalkeeper who's just completely static. And it's.
He's just not picked up, Shearer. I'm just watching it again now, and it's just ridiculous that.
I remember watching this goal and just feeling like this was 3 minutes in, and for 3 minutes we had gone at Germany, and I just remember thinking, this all changes in 15 minutes time, but I just remember thinking, we're not scared of them. We're playing a semi-final at Wembley. The crowd is with us. We're just not scared of them. And every other time I had seen England play Germany, we had always sat back. We'd always been worried. And I just thought, I honestly just, at that moment in time, at that glorious moment in time, I just couldn't see us losing. But yeah, England continue, a lot of pressure, doing very, very well. Germany eased their way into the game. And then on 16 minutes, I think this is a terrible goal to concede.
Yeah.
I think basically the central defender stays up after it's not a corner, I think it's a free kick, and it's Helmet. Muller works the ball to him, sort of edge of the box, and he has a sort of half a shot, half a cross, and it just ends up into that horrible no man's land. But Stuart Pearce has got himself completely the wrong side of Kuntz, and who just sort of taps it in, basically. Just there's a little bit of an unnecessary slide before he makes contact with the ball, but it's a little bit of a heartbreaking moment. Do you remember watching that at home?
I think that's definitely one of those moments that just it struck me watching back that I could remember the Shearer header vividly, and I couldn't remember how Germany had scored. Because it was that because everything happens in that early flurry, but yeah, it's just you watch it back now and it is just I would not have been watching it with analytical eyes then, but now it's just and when you considering what we were talking about with that back three, that lapse is just, and it's like even if Kuntz doesn't get to the ball, Scholl is overlapping him, and McManaman's nowhere to be seen at that point.
No, they've both got pulled about 6 feet too wide, and they both can't get back into position anything like quick enough. And I remember this Germany goal going in quite vividly. I remember the noise around me and various people coming over to pat me on the head, as I remember. But immediate sinking feeling. Immediate feeling of, oh, we're not going to win this. We're going to actually lose this quite badly. And I was...
It was a kind of normal service resumed sort of feeling.
And England's response is actually quite decent to the goal. No, they don't sort of retreat to the point where they're playing ridiculously deep or anything like that. But they lose a little bit of the freedom they've been playing with in the 15 minutes up until that point. But they do okay, really. The rest of the 90 minutes, it's a little bit nondescript, isn't it? Till extra time.
And I think that's again why, because I'm reading back articles about this tournament, both kind of retrospective and from the time. And retrospectively, people talk about Euro '96 in a quite negative way, as I say, partly for there not being an outstanding team and partly for all of these golden goal extra time periods that were really cagey. Now, obviously, we'll come on to the golden goal period for this game. But also, I think people, this game, you've got that flurry of activity in the first 15 minutes, a couple of other England chances, and nothing else for the 90, and then it's in extra time that it all comes alive. And so you could argue, is it truly a great game when 80 odd minutes of it are quite flat? But I think there's enough in there, and I think the extra time taken in isolation is so ridiculously enjoyable that it doesn't really matter that the 90 minutes leading up to that, petered out, especially after half time. I mean, I don't really remember anything about the second half. The thing is, it wasn't even cagey. There was just an awful lot of extremely well organised defensive play. So the game was sort of stifled, really. But I think when you talk about your favourite or most memorable game, it's so rare that it's actually about the football. And I think this is a very decent example because there'll be lots of people listening to this who this is also their favourite game. And you're right, it is all about extra time, and we have to talk about it. We have to talk about, like you say, that moment, capital T, capital M. It's still... It sounds ridiculous to say this, but I still watch this clip and still think Gaz is going to get there. Yeah. Every time. There's actually from watching it back, and I don't know if it's maybe in because it's at the other end. So is it which way round were the two halves of extra time? Was the Gaza miss in the first half or the second half?
It was second, I think.
So it must have been in the first half, but there was because there's a chance, or it might even have been in the second half of the match. I'm not sure. Anyway, but there is a chance where up at the other end, the end where Germany score, where there's an England chance that I'd completely forgotten about, and I was watching it and got excited by this chance. But yeah, the Gaza one is to a lesser extent Anderton hitting the post as well, because that's just such a ridiculous scramble, but. Yeah, the Gaza one just feels like that moment feels like a moment where like the universe has broken and like we've gone into the wrong parallel universe because he did not make that connection. And it's like everything else about it is perfect.
Oh, it's such a good move. Gaza himself picks the ball up out wide, knocks it inside to Sheringham, who picks out Shearer's run. Bear in mind how Shearer played for the majority of his career. He's taken up a position basically as a right winger, and it's a lovely run from right wing. Sheringham picks him out brilliantly. First time cross across, and Gaz has continued his run, and the ITV coverage, you've got Keegan and Moore there, and obviously Keegan wears his emotions on his sleeve, and there is there is a noise that I can only describe as a football noise. It's one of those noises you don't hear anywhere else. And it just comes from both of them, as Brian Moore does that wonderful thing he used to do where he goes a little bit high-pitched and starts talking really quickly because he thinks it's going to happen. And Keegan just makes this "oh" noise, and it just encapsulates the whole moment. Barry Davies talked me through his take on it.
So, I mean, I think Barry Davies just reacts like I think we were all reacting. The ball comes across from Shearer, and Barry Davies sees that Gascoigne is coming in. It's the classic commentator moment of shouting the name as they're about to score. Barry Davies screams Gascoigne's name in a way that I don't think I've ever heard him do so before. And then there's kind of this briefest of moments, and then Davies just goes, "I don't believe it." And that's what, that's what we were talking about. For those who say that Barry Davies does not get invested in England games, he cannot believe his eyes there. Nobody can believe that hasn't gone in.
It's just such a human moment, isn't it? Yeah. It's one of those football moments where any semblance of professionalism
I've just watched it again, and you forget that his foot does actually make contact with the ball.
Yeah,
it's just diverts it, or I don't know if it's a bobble on the turf. It's just from the side angle you see that the ball does actually change direction. Yeah, it does. Yeah. His foot goes over the ball. It's not even that he doesn't make contact.
No, Keegan's famous comment about it was if he was a size 11 rather than a size 9, he would have scored. And the ball actually does take a bobble, but the bobble doesn't actually divert the path. If anything, the bobble slightly helps us out because it slightly brings it back towards Gascoigne, and it's that for me is a moment that from the very second it happened until the day I die, I will always remember that moment. It's a JFK moment. It really is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was the extra time here was. It became, after all the organisation of the 80 minutes that preceded it after that opening, the sort of 75, 80 minutes after the 2 goals, it was topsy-turvy, wasn't it?
Mm. Well, this is the thing, because obviously you've got the England chances, and there's the... a lot of it does come in the... we were talking before about which half it was, and so the Gascoigne chance actually comes relatively early in the first half, about halfway through the first half. And I think it's quite interesting that we kind of, I think, mentally picture it as being at the very end, and I think that's because it's a chance that would have won the game because it's golden goal. But now we don't have golden goal anymore, and we didn't have golden goal before this. And so your brain thinks, oh, well, if it was the last-ditch chance to win the game, it must have been at the very, very end of extra time. And actually, it was relatively early in it. And actually, the chance that I was trying to recall earlier, because again, I've just looked back at it, it was in the second half of extra time. And it's McManaman breaks clear into the box.
Yeah,
and he hairs clear, but then he's chased down. He gets too tight an angle, and there's nobody up there with him, so he just has a quite half-hearted shot, and it doesn't come up. But there's just this moment where he's in behind, and it's like it's Steve McManaman with that hair in full flight, and you think something's going to happen. So as I say, watching it, because I didn't remember that too well from previously, watching it again now, I was like, oh, is this a version where McManaman scores late in extra time? But that first half, we've got the moment where we think we've won it, but then Germany have got the moment where they think they've won it.
Yeah. You see, this is the topsy-turvy nature of it, and talk us through the moment first.
Yeah, so this is about 6 minutes into that first half, so it's before the Gascoigne moment, and it's a corner from Muller, edge of the 6-yard box, Kuntz heads it in. And you think that's it. And I certainly, again, I remember my dad telling me this, that, imagine being there and not seeing it on TV and it taking longer to filter through that it had been disallowed. But even watching it now and watching it in slow motion and watching it on TV, does anybody know what it was disallowed for?
No, well, it was officially, I think it was a shove, wasn't it?
I think he's a little bit, he's leaning on, I'm not sure who it is actually, because Pearce goes up to challenge him when he heads it. I think it might be Ince.
Pearce, it's another bit of a moment for Pearce because he gets right under the ball. He doesn't judge it well at all. But yeah, I remember having a minor heart attack at that moment. But so we go finishes 1-1, as everybody knows. Spoilers for a game that happened in 1996. And we go into the penalty shootout, and we weren't quite the England with penalty shootouts we are today, because obviously we had sort of 1998 to come and our various failures against Portugal. But we felt, I was stupidly optimistic because obviously everybody knows what happened at Italia 90, but that Spain winning the Spain game on penalties felt like a moment. It felt like
we can actually do these.
Yes, yeah. We would be proved criminally wrong on that, as we both know. But it did feel like, again, nothing to fear. And we go into these penalties, and England, so good.
This is possibly the most horrible irony of this game is that in the previous round, was it previous round or two? No, it wasn't. Yeah, previous round, we knocked out Spain on penalties, scored all 4 England penalties, but went through because of 2 Spain misses or 2 Seaman saves, whichever way you want to look at it. But this 5 penalties: Shearer, Platt, Pearce, Gascoigne, Sheringham. And they're perfect.
They are. They are. We'll go through them briefly. So Shearer,
this is. I could be wrong, but notwithstanding the fact that Southgate missed, I would say this is England's best performance in a penalty shootout. Because they scored 5.
It absolutely is. Shearer steps up, sends the keeper. Not only does he send the keeper the wrong way, but he puts it top right as you're looking at the goal, and he absolutely top corners it. Absolutely top corners it. So
you never in a million years anticipated that Shearer would miss.
No, but the audacity to pick out the top corner is quite something. First up in a semi-final of this magnitude. Then Platt steps up and he puts the keeper goes the right way, but he can't get there because Platt has put it in exactly the same place Shearer did, and it's just too good a penalty. They've both gone top right, and both brilliant pens. Then Pearce steps up, and I was worried at this moment. We'd had that moment in the Spain game and that moment of catharsis, but Pearce's penalty style was, I'm just gonna. It's where Julian Dix eventually took the torch from, wasn't it? It was, I'm going to hit this as hard as I possibly can. But again, he sends the keeper the wrong way and just tucks it into the bottom left corner. Lovely, lovely penalty. And then
I think Pearce's is maybe the one that, you can't really tell because of how hard he's hit it, but if the keeper goes the right way, there's potentially a save. It's got to be a very good save, but I think of the 5, his is probably the most savable.
Yeah. But then Gazza steps up, and Gazza's penalty goes top right again. But it doesn't. It's that good a penalty that if you watch it again, it doesn't hit the back of the net. It goes straight into the side netting first. He's tucked it that close to the post, and keeper hasn't got a sniff. And it
is a thing of beauty. You could write sonnets about Gascoigne's penalty there because the best way to take a penalty is to put it as far away from the keeper as possible, and the way that most people do that is to just hit it as hard as possible, the way that Shearer does, to just put it in the top corner. To place it as far away from the keeper as possible, and it's like with a free kick. It's so much sweeter when it kisses the inside of the post than if it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so to take a penalty off the inside of the post in a shootout against Germany is arguably... Well, no, I was going to say it's arguably a better moment than the goal against Scotland for him. It isn't, because, few things are. But it's a pretty amazing moment. And it brings us back to what I was saying about Barry Davies and his love of Gascoigne. His reaction to that penalty is lovely.
And then Sheringham steps up for the pressure penalty. Both sides have been perfect here. The German penalties are very good. They're not quite in the same class as the English penalties.
There's one, I forget whose it is. I don't know if it's Ziegers. That Seaman, maybe it's not actually, but it's no. Ziegers gets away from him. I'm just watching it now, but there's one that Seaman gets a hand to,
and Sheringham steps up for this penalty. As I said, huge pressure, and not only does he top corner it again and go top right, he sees the keeper move, and I don't know if he changes his mind or not, but he sees the keeper moves really early and comes about a yard and a half off his line in the end. And Sheringham sees that and just doesn't faze him in the slightest. And he just tickles it into the top corner as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And it was, when you watch that penalty shootout back, in your mind plays tricks on you. And I knew we did okay, but as you said, that's our best penalty. If we ignore the last one for a minute, that's our best penalty shootout I've ever seen.
The penalties, I think, as well, are a vindication of something that I think is really interesting about the game, which is that England play 120 minutes with the same 11.
Yeah. And
you look at the bench, and the bench isn't amazing, but you do wonder if in normal time a Les Ferdinand or a Robbie Fowler could have come off the bench to make a bit of a difference, even though, Robbie Fowler, and I say this as a Liverpool fan, never exactly the most prolific or important player for England. But, just you wonder why he let them get knackered out there. I mean, one thing is I don't think they look knackered at the end of it, but also you look at the 5 players who take those 5 penalties and you think, well, you'd need all of those to be on the pitch to take those penalties. And probably you wouldn't take Shearer off, so maybe the only one you'd contemplate taking off from up front is Sheringham. But then you look at the way Sheringham takes that penalty and you think, no, that's why he was still on the pitch.
And it's interesting because the counterpoint is that the Germans used all 3 of their substitutes, and 2 of their substitutes, Hassler and Struntz, take their first 2 penalties. But I sort of see the logic in it at the same time, because I think if England had started extra time badly, or looked like they were really fading very, very quickly, I reckon Venables would have changed it very quickly. But I can sort of see the sense in, hang on, we're actually doing okay here, so let's not change it. Let's just leave it as is. And I mean, those 5 players, as you said, you watch that penalty shootout and you think, well, yeah, that's absolutely the correct decision. The problem is then that Southgate is the one who has volunteered to take the 6th penalty, and you can argue all day, should Ince have taken one, stuck his hand up? Should McManaman and Anderton have stuck their hand up to go before Southgate? You can argue all these things, but a penalty shootout is such an unquantifiable thing, and I sometimes think if a player sticks his hand up and says he wants to go, then I sometimes think you just got to respect that, really. And it's the first penalty of 10 taken that is noticeably not a great penalty. And, of course, Kupka saves it. And the noise around Wembley, again, is it's a football noise, isn't it? Just a sort of collective... It's not even an oh no, is it? It's just a sort of collective sigh of an instant air of resignation. And then up steps Andreas Müller, and so begins me and him having lifelong enemies from that moment on. Do you remember his celebration?
Yeah, because he takes the mick out of Gaza, doesn't he? Because Gaza had kind of done that sort of that kind of bragging pose after he's taken that, and then Müller does the same. Which he goes off doing it, but then halfway through he sort of semi-loses confidence with it, and he keeps turning round because he doesn't think anybody's coming over. And I think there's this moment of, oh, hang on, am I actually going to be on my own here doing this in a crowd in a stadium with 76,500 people who want to kill me? But Müller scores, game over, glorious failure. It's what England do, isn't it? I know.
those moments, though, in that game, I think are certainly enough for yourself and various other people who will completely agree with you to hang your hat on it and say, yeah, that it's absolutely right to have it as a favourite game, regardless of the penalty shootout.
Well, because I think to say that your favourite game has to necessarily be a glorious triumph is, I think, to look at football a certain way. And being English, it's hard to look at football that way.
No.
Again, as a Liverpool fan, I would say my favourite ever Liverpool game is a certain game in 2005, and that was a glorious triumph, albeit an utterly ridiculous one that looked like it was going to be a complete and total failure. But yeah, there is something very England about the most kind of magical of nights, and just everything was in the air that night, and everything felt like this was going to be the night that we'd get revenge for 1990 and go on to a final that everyone knew that England would win if they got through.
It's a whole combination of things that really, and I completely respect this decision to sort of come out right off the bat and say, well, this is it, because this would definitely be in my top 5, probably in my top 3, potentially even in my top 2, because it was just, there's so many little things around this game that I think you forget as well. So, like, a lot of people don't realise, but England were drawn as the away team here, and it's sometimes that slips past people. That's why we're in the grey kit. That's why we're in the away changing room on the night as well. But it's just.
But if you're playing Germany at Wembley, you kind of want Germany to be in the white kit, don't you? It's just the problem is just that England were in the grey kit, and I'm not always a purist when it comes to football kits, but and I think taken on its own merits, it's not a horrendous looking shirt, but it does look wrong. Now you associate it with that night, and you can't imagine those players playing in a red kit, but you do think it's England against Germany at Wembley. They should be in a red kit.
Excellent. Well, we'll wrap up. The final thing I wanted to say about it was that advert, the Pizza Hut advert that followed with Waddle and Pearce and Southgate, was not okay, because I was not over it, as Pizza Hut assumed. We're going to end these podcasts with a question that I'm going to ask everybody who does it. Favourite England player that isn't Paul Gascoigne?
Well, this one's going to sound weird because I've already talked about being a Liverpool fan, but as a Liverpool fan, it's hard to pick out Liverpool players for England because, the two don't tend to go hand in hand. It's Gary Lineker.
Excellent choice.
Which I think is also weird because I didn't really I was kind of into football, but not really having a chance to watch it when he was in his prime. But I was reading Roy of the Rovers from like the summer of 1990, and he was always in it. And I found out that he had the same birthday as me, and he was, England's goal-scoring hero. And so I didn't know at the time that he used to play for Everton. But there was a danger in those early days of football that I could have turned out to be a Spurs fan, because I loved Gary Lineker, and my first cup final was 91. I just loved, and so going back and obviously watching stuff like footage of that 1990 game, and his goals against Cameroon and stuff. I've just, I know not everyone does, but I've always liked him, even though he is a bit smug, and not just because he shares my birthday.
I have regularly lamented that for several generations now, Gary Lineker is a TV anchorman. He was bloody brilliant for England, and he was one of the he was one of that generation of players who could take his club form into international games, no problem whatsoever, and that is a fabulous choice to get us started. Thank you very much for joining me, Seb, on this very first edition of these. That we've got several more to come, several people lined up, but great to remember and talk about what was a truly iconic game, I think, Seb.
Indeed, and thanks for having me. I'm going to go and cry for a bit and maybe order a Pizza Hut.
So thank you for listening to the Stiles Council. You can find us on Sphinx Football under their sort of podcast network. We're there, and under their Twitter feed. If you've enjoyed it, spread the word, basically. Do our work for us. Makes it easier for us then. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Seb. See you later.
Cheers.